Hi, hello, welcome to my first webinar, and just bear with me because I'm not sure how this is going to go. But I've just come back from the LEYF Chef Academy launch, and I have to say I'm slightly hyper because I can't quite believe we've finally done it. So people often say that those of us who work in the LES sector are patient, but actually we're not. Or that good things come to those who wait, but they don't. So I think us, having started this journey maybe over 5 years ago, we were neither patient or willing to wait, because if you do, nothing ever comes to those who wait. So I would say there's been a combination of indefatigable optimism and grit that has driven us through to get to this point. And now we're here. I think we all need to do a deep breath and then let's kind of progress with the whole thing and see where it takes us. So the story of the Chef Academy and the qualification is a long one, but I think it's worth it in the world of obesity that we currently have. I understand that if you do a good webinar, you have to ask questions all the way along, and then they will miraculously appear on the screen, and then I will try and answer them. And I have a couple of props as well, just to show you things, because it's a bit boring otherwise. Although the sun is streaming through the window there, it looks quite nice. So the child obesity is global, as you know, and is kind of quite complicated. 1 in 4 children are going to be obese by the time now, they say, they enter primary school, and 2 in 4 by the time they leave primary school. And the problem also is particularly strong in areas where people live in poverty. But the answer isn't just, food, it's complex. The journey to school, what shops you see along the way, what they call the obesogenic kind of environment. And clearly physical development is all part of the picture. But today we're just going to focus on food and chefs and none of those other things, but we do all recognize that these things are part of the solution as well. So the point of the Chef Academy came, I guess, about 6 years ago, when it struck me when I was looking at the needs of my own chefs that there was nothing really that focused on them and what they needed. And that when we were looking for training for them, all you could find was manual handling and health and safety and hygiene. And then if you wanted to get a course on, cakes without sugar, or, interesting teas, or new sauces for children's lunches, you just couldn't find anything. And I began to look around, and what I realized was there was no qualification for chefs at all. So when you look at the whole suite of qualifications, they tend to be very generic. But as you and I all know, actually, children's needs are quite different, and portion control and all of those things are really important. And also, if you think about children, we are building their sort of inherent structure. So everything that we feed them from the time they're born is really building the way they're going to be for the long term. But yet all policy tends to start with schools. And, there were initiatives on the School Food Trust and eventually the Children's Food Trust, but it was very much focused on arriving in school. And what we really wanted to do was think about children arriving in nursery, and on average at 6 months. But at that point, we could at least lock into parents' needs and experiences at that earlier age, so that we could actually make a difference, in fact. So the point was that, how would we do that? I think there are roughly 500,000 children attending nurseries. There's 24,000 nurseries in the country. So that's quite a lot of children that we could influence. And then from that, maybe have that ripple effect where then the next child is kind of better fed because the parent is more confident about food. And all of this is in a context of, a raft of information that's been shared through social media and handouts and, campaigns. And interestingly, despite all of that, it's not getting through to people. So it's not, I think, the information, it must be the way it's been shared. And I guess if you think about being a parent, of course that fruit and vegetables is going to be good for your child. But if you have your finger wagging in your face telling you must do this and you must do that, it's quite hard to hear that message. But we all know that when children come to nursery, they're very influenced by their peers. Parents feel more reassured if the nursery feels in tune with it. And we noticed as well that when we had parents' evenings, or when parents came in to talk about food, they were very keen to talk to the chef. Now, that's a great idea if the chef is confident to talk to them. What we found was, of course, that they weren't, and they needed to feel assured that what they said was correct. So it seemed to me inevitable that we needed a qualification that would really frame that conversation and give them confidence, and in doing that, give the parent confidence. So the qualification was developed initially with a lot of support from dietitians and nutritionists, particularly in some of the London boroughs, food campaigners. We had a chef caterer. I talked to farmers. I talked to restaurant chefs. I found myself in a whole world I've never found myself in before, talking to people in a completely different, sets of experiences. And I found myself having to watch Ready, Steady, Cook and other things like that. Though I must say it didn't necessarily improve my cooking. But anyway, so eventually we found our way to trying to design this course, by which point the funding around the process had been lost. So we kind of carried on and did it ourselves in the evenings and at the weekends. And the journey to get actually an accredited qualification was really, my gosh, it was really long-winded and complex. And that's why you can't wait for things to come to you, because they won't. So eventually, Cash said they saw the benefit of it, and the sector certainly saw the benefit of it, and so Cash accredited qualification. So now we have a chef qualification that looks like this. This is the one, guys. So I need you to find that on their website and look carefully at all of it and what it includes. And it was made from a professional qualification anyway, but we added in things that mattered to us. For example, stuff around nutrition and how you prepare for children, like your 2-year-old who doesn't like their peas to touch their carrots. The portion sizes, that mattered quite a lot. And just really how to provide healthier dishes that are really interesting for children and that they really like them. But lots of it on here is, standard stuff. How do you prepare, produce and finish basic fish dishes, our meat dishes, our poultry dishes, our vegetable dishes. So it's quite general in some ways. But at the same time, it's got a focus. So, for example, support healthy lifestyles for children through the provision of food and nutrition. That therefore implies you need nutrition understanding. And then the optional units are really looking at the pastas and the breads and the making of the teas. Because what we found as well when we were working with our chefs was that tea was a real problem. And actually tea is where you often got high fat, sort of cheap food for children, or yet even more hummus and carrot sticks. And again, that was a balance issue. And there was also a balance around carbohydrates. So for some people, they thought a good diet was really like feeding a 40-year-old woman on a diet. Everything had to be low fat and no carbohydrate. But of course, little children need carbohydrate and they need zinc. So all of those things, I think, were important for chefs to understand, to share with everybody else, and to feel confident to be able to share that with parents who really struggle, I think, to understand. And so many parents, particularly in London, don't have a big, family network around them to encourage them or to support them. And when they did the research, I think Bounty did some research, and they found that, the person you tended to go to for advice was your family, your mom or your friend or your sister or somebody who was close to you. And if you didn't have that, who would kind of fall into that space? And so we thought for a lot, the chef in the nursery could be the sort of, food partner in some ways and build that sort of confidence too. So I think all of those things was a factor, but the qualification was great, but it wasn't going to be enough on its own. You needed to think about how do you structure that and where do you sort of frame that. So one of the things to do with that was to develop an academy. And so an academy is partly to give some center point by which we can roll this out to start with. And then it also means we can start collecting data and some evidence to see what patterns are emerging, so we can inform people about children's food, children's nutrition, you know, because it's not really taken that seriously, actually. There's a lot of panic about child obesity, but it's a very deficit model. We should be turning it on its head and thinking about how do you create the healthy children by understanding and celebrating children's food. Nursery food might have been called in the past, but it doesn't actually matter. But it's about the significance of how we feed our children and how we know how to make meals that are going to be fun and interesting for them, because children aren't going to be inspired by the notion that they're choosing healthily. They're going to be inspired by the notion that they are choosing food they like, and that makes them feel good, really. So I think that's where we went. And then, of course, to build a chef academy, you needed a chef kitchen, and that proved a bit of a challenge, and that's been a while in getting some funding. But we were very lucky last year in getting some funding from the charity Guys and St Thomas's, who really buy into the idea of supporting the child obesity agenda, particularly in the two boroughs that they work in London, which is Lambeth and Southwark. And so they were prepared to give us some investment to kit it out. And then, you know, we are always going to have a quiet voice if we don't pull together and collaborate. So we wanted, you know, to be involved with the industry too. And I know that some people find that sort of a challenge, but for me, in the end, it makes no sense not to bring on board people who can influence as well. So we had some support from Breaks and particularly from Nisbets in terms of the way they helped us to get all the equipment and the uniforms for the chefs. And then social enterprise, and my experience of social enterprise is that networking and collaboration is kind of core principle. And it's all about who you talk to and how you talk to them and how you connect with them. And also serendipity. And everyone will tell you, and I'm sure you know this, that I will talk to anyone, anywhere, anytime, any place. And that's kind of how we got where we are now, to also have formed a really lovely relationship with London and South East colleges. And they're going to help us to deliver the apprenticeship and the qualification for the chefs. And already the chefs have been down there and had a masterclass, and they're really engaged with it. And as a sector, guys, as a pushback to you really is you need to think about the role your chef plays in your kitchen. And we all know the traditional one, you know, don't you go in my kitchen. I saw that, you know, your mug was on the kitchen, my kitchen, and I'm never going to come out of my kitchen, to the kind of chef that opens the door, chats to the parents and sees themselves as part of the team. And so even in my own organisation, so, you know, many years ago now, you know, when I checked out whether they attended the team days away or team meetings, they hadn't thought to invite the chef. They thought, well, the chef could be at home in the nursery, cleaning and sorting things out and getting the cupboards sorted, etc., etc. Now that wouldn't happen. But, you know, I think there is something about us as a sector looking also at our role of the chef in each of our settings and what that looks like and what that means. And I think having access to a qualification and done some CPD through the Chef Academy might help to raise the status of chefs and to give them confidence to talk to parents and indeed to staff about, you know, what good food looks like and how do you make it healthy and that sort of thing. So I really would wish one of you would ask a question now so we can engage with someone else, because I think I've been talking for at least 15 minutes. So any question will do, doesn't matter. I just want to know that all of you who've nicely registered to join this webinar are out there and you're not just scoffing cake under the desk. And while you do that, I guess I have to still talk. So currently we have 8 chefs in the academy. Now they're all LEYF chefs because I like to practice everything on my own staff first, and I get it right, and then when we get it right we open it to the public. And our cohort 2 is already full. So each cohort will be probably 6 trainee chefs or indeed I'd love to have some more trainee chef apprentices. And that would be really great, because what can happen at the moment is that cohort is full, but we can open the academy up on other days, and so we could run CPD for some of the other colleagues, other nurseries. I don't mind where you come from, but the thing is, it is in Stockwell in South London, which isn't amazingly difficult to get to. It's simply on the Victoria line, and you can get to it from Vauxhall. So if those of you who might be outside of London thinking, oh, this is a big drag, just think about the benefit it would have to the confidence of your chef, and how we begin to build a big conversation across the sector about the value we bring to good food and to nurturing our children, you know, in terms of how we feed them, and in opening up the conversation about food. So we just had a question from somebody who's asking, what would you say is the most important thing about preparing food for young children? So that's I'd love to have a chef sitting next to me. I've just spent the morning with 8 of them. But I think for us, preparing food for young children actually starts as part of the nursery pedagogy and the curriculum. And then actually we have real food in the nursery, and we have no problem about that, and we use proper tools. And so the children are very used to cutting up butternut squashes and parsnips and various other things. We stopped putting fruit out because they eat it too quickly, and that becomes a bit more expensive. But you know, you can go a long way on a cauliflower. So I think in terms of preparing foods, it's really about the chefs understanding how children respond to food. For example, we know that if you put too much on their plates when you're preparing to set it out, they don't like it. So I think it's something about how do you teach the children also to help in that process of preparation. And I think by having real food as part of your everyday curriculum, it tends to make them a bit more aware of what it should look like and how it should taste. The other thing is, there is quite an interesting debate about when you prepare food, whether you make a big deal about it being a new thing and, you know, let's try this today, children, or whether you just put it out as a kind of natural sort of thing and they just have a go at it anyway. And I think that's quite an interesting perspective, because you know, with children, particularly our 2-year-olds, they're very wary of tasting new things. Their taste buds are beginning to get quite powerful at that age, and they're slightly overwhelmed by taste that we take for granted. So I think in terms of that sort of level of preparation, then, and how we prepare what we serve and how we do our menus, I think that's quite a factor to take account of. We have a question from Cork. This is great. I'm from Cork. I love to hear from people in Cork. And thank you for saying you're enjoying this webinar. Will you guys, I don't know if you can type your answer, but is Cork going to do something like this? Because that would be pretty amazing. In fact, the obesity rates in Ireland are no different to here. And I think the correlation between poverty and obesity there is also the same as here. So, and I think the regulations in Ireland are slightly different with the health centres and stuff, managing things in a slightly different way. But it'd be very interesting to have a UK-wide plus Ireland kind of shared initiative, shared conversation about this, because I think we're very close and we're very aligned. How will I ensure that children from low-income families who attend the nursery only a few hours a day and not be there for lunch are exposed to trying healthy food? Whoever you are, that is such a brilliant question. And when I was blogging about this the other day, what shocks me is how many nurseries are closing down, and they're all in areas of poverty. The report from CEDA recently was quite stunning in that they were like talking about nearly a third of nurseries in poor areas actually closing. And that's absolutely true. So because the funding is inadequate, what's happening is people are topping up, and they're topping up by charging people for lunches. And I've heard tell of people being charged £25 for their food for the week, which is £5 a day, and that's quite a lot. And that's okay if you can afford it, but it's pretty tough if you can't. But I do understand that fundamentally the issue is funding, and it's not about people trying to be greedy, but trying to balance the two out. I think personally, we really need to shake this up. So what we did here at LEYF was, what we noticed was, if you were giving the free 15 hours, you could just give it the morning or the afternoon, and actually we wouldn't have them to lunch. So we reshifted the hours so that we could ensure that they did have lunch with us. But I do recognize that in some places they may not be able to afford it. I think, again, that's why we need one very strong voice, because it's pretty shocking, isn't it, that children most likely to suffer from obesity, not because they're under-eating, because they're overeating the wrong foods, actually are the very ones that aren't hit by the so-called government initiative. And that children who come from very well-to-do families can access the 30 hours and have to top up quite comfortably. And they indeed have got maybe more supportive home lives. So it's, as a society, it's a pretty indictment of our attitude to the poverty and child poverty. It's something I did a whole TED talk on because it upset me so much. Can you tell us about, Tanya's asking about, can you tell us about the social aspect of mealtimes at LEYF? Yeah, very interesting. I don't know how many out there are parents listening, and how many of you work directly with parents, but I can't, you know, in 30 years of working in this kind of field, I can't, you know, there are so many parents who get really freaked out about weaning, about their toddlers, and their toddlers being quite difficult around food and balanced food, and them being mortified in the supermarket when the child's kicking off, so they want to give them anything to shut them up. Or again, where they think they're doing well, and then they discover that there's new research that says you're not. For example, we all thought giving children raisins was a great thing. You know, hey ho, give them a box of raisins, and that would be a healthy option and would keep them calm while you did the shopping. And then we discovered afterwards that actually giving them a box of raisins was not such a good idea, because it had sugar and it stuck to their teeth, and you had to give it to them at a different time after food, etc., etc. So it's very interesting about you know, what parents think, you know, and what they think about what is good, and what they know is what is good, and how they, you know, manage those kind of challenges in their child's development. So for us at LEYF, it's important that the children all sit around the table. The staff also join them, and the whole event is meant to be a kind of social experience. So there's no singing or anything like that at the table. It isn't seen like that. They are sort of encouraged to have conversation. They use proper cutlery, and they serve themselves. The whole experience is meant to be social and relaxed. The older children have a kind of restaurant experience, because we're preparing them for going to school, and then they may well be carrying trays in a matter of months, having sat down with us with it all served out nicely with napkins and jugs of water, and the whole social experience that comes with what might be called traditional family time. Another challenge, of course, is the family time thing, is, of course, that nowadays children don't necessarily sit at the table. Many children don't have a table. They sit before the telly. They're kind of lined up. And so therefore that kind of natural conversation point is lost. There was a very interesting report recently in response to some of those children who are being murdered in knife crime across the country, about how the impact of never having kind of quality family time, where you sit at the end of the day and talk about your day, impacts on their sense of relationship. And this is all compounded now by the whole business of them being on their phones and their laptops and social media and Fortnite and all the other things that seems to obsess them. In fact, yesterday I was coming home on the train, and I was sitting opposite a woman, and she was trying to just get a couple of answers from her children about their day as she was on her way home. And she got very kind of shirty with them, and I had to laugh. And so I looked at her and we smiled, and I said, you sound just like sometimes my sister is with my nephew, which is like, get off that computer. And she said, I could tell both of them were on their computer. I didn't want to talk. And, you know, this is a real worry for me. And we started to talk about these things. And it turned out she was a nutritionist. And it turns out she was working for a charity on food. And that one of the things she was doing was working with parents to try and get them to understand how to manage all of this stuff. Anyway, we exchanged cards, and I think the rest of the carriage, our commuter time, was kind of slightly bemused by this conversation the pair of us were having on the way home. But I was quite kind of enthused by that. But I mean, she was raising the point that so many of you are concerned about, is that like, what's happening to the social engagement? And in the past, dinner was often the social engagement. Or when I was growing up, it was tea. You had your tea in the evening. But that's when you sat together. My father worked shifts, so he didn't always join us, but you know, we all did expect to sit around the table. And now even when I go home to Cork, in fact, to see my parents, we all sit around the table for our lunch and our tea, which I have to say I'm very bad at when I go home, because when I go home sometimes I come in late. I just want to sit in the sofa, turn on some chewing gum TV and eat my supper without having to engage with anyone. So I totally understand that it's, you know, there's all this almost perfection one is aiming for, that kind of like detergent advert, perfect family. But somehow or other, I think if there's some balance we can create, and we can be human in that and not be sort of, you know, dictating, I think we're more likely to have, you know, engaged parents and indeed engaged staff, to be honest. I can't see the last question because it seems to have fallen off my thing. So it's there's a nice reference, and I suspect that's Linda from Old School House Nurseries. Actually, looks like her. If it is Linda, your question hasn't come up. But you do a great job in what you do, and as a great campaigner for food and what matters for food. She's also developing Panko, which is connecting the physical and the nutrition together into a course that will actually, and indeed I think a qualification that will be really helpful. I can see you now. So Linda asks how we can encourage positive healthy eating in the staff team so they're consistently promoting healthy eating practices. Oh, good question, you know. I'll just take a sip of water just to get in the mood for that. I am known for speaking my mind and for saying things as they are. I think working with children for long enough makes you like that, actually, to be honest. There's no kind of emperor's new clothes. And the truth is, in our own sector, we're not the healthiest at times, are we? And so I think we have to own that. I think, what's the new expression? You have to call that out. So we have to do what we can. And, you know, sometimes after the long day and you have, say, a staff meeting, you're kind of inclined to want to have some chocolate and some treats and, you know, a glass of white wine or red wine or whatever. And that feels okay. But I guess it's about the balance and all of that too. So obviously today at the launch of the Chef Academy, we had nothing that wasn't healthy. But it was really beautifully cooked by Teresa, our chef. And I get that you can't always have the access to that sort of thing. But one of the things we have found, actually, is by engaging the chef in the dietary requirements of the staff too, it's been really interesting. So the chefs have been much more willing to do the sort of food for the staff meeting and certainly for the parents' meetings, and have been more proactive in the engagement and the conversation around, I know you love a bit of cake, guys, and I know you're flagging, so but I'll make you one with beetroot, or I'll make you one with parsnip, or I'll make you one with no sugar. So I think it's about engaging the chefs also in that. I think if we take the same view as we take with parents, which appears to them to be quite sort of preachy, I think people close off. But if we make it easier, if you think about the nudge principle, that you use nudge to kind of change behaviors by making things easy for them. I mean, the first example of that I don't know, I read about many years ago now, was if you want someone to eat an apple, kind of slice it up and make it accessible to them, and they're more likely to pick it. So I think it's something around that, making it available and in a kind of a safe way, and like it's not in a healthy way, but not focusing. Because in the end, staff are going to be like the children. They want to eat stuff that's nice, that tastes nice, that looks nice, and that makes them feel good. And I think sometimes it's a bit like if you're offered a biscuit and the so-called healthy option is your hobnob and the other option is your chocolate biscuit, you're more likely, because if it's a biscuit, you're going more likely to go for the chocolate bit. So I think it's that kind of ideas. How do you make it look attractive? It kind of fit their perspective. For some, it's a shock. You know, some of our young apprentices, when they join us, I don't know that they know about alternatives. They only know what they know. So by providing them with alternatives in a nice kind of calm way. So if you're teaching, or if you're in the staff room having jugs of water with a bit of mint and a bit of lemon in it, it's quite an attractive option to say, well, endless bottles, we can't have them because we want to be sustainable. Or, you know, putting a plate of cakes out, but none of them have sugar in, are all those kind of options, I think. But I think it's our tone rather than what we serve is the tipping point. Even though we're, you know, because we're willing and we're wanting desperately for our staff to be healthy. And I know Linda used to do all sorts of runs and walks, and she got involved with active matters, and, you know, standing for longer and sitting for longer and all those kind of things. I think it's an attitude thing as well. And it does need to come from the top too, where there's, you know, a willingness to make the effort at every level. So, you know, one of my nurseries in Eastbury, which is an area that's really highly deprived, is run by a really nice manager there. And she's very understanding of the complexity of food and people's attitude to food. And she started this very simple idea of just putting a big basket of apples in the hall, or, you know, mostly apples or pears, I think, for when I've been visiting, but there may be other things too. And just encouraging the parents to take one on their way in or on their way out. And it's become much, I watched sometimes, and they are now taking the apple on the way home, whereas before, you know, the child picked up from nursery and immediately they want to go to the shop and have some crisps. But so I think sometimes small, subtle changes actually changes attitudes, and then doing that changes the way we behave. I'm going to have another sip of water if you don't mind. This is so hot in here. Okay, so are there any other questions out there? I'd love to hear, because this weirdness about this webinar thing is that you feel like you're not talking to anyone, but I'd like to learn a bit about what people think as well. Because one of the things that I do, as I suppose in support of the whole child obesity thing, is I'm a member of the Mayor's Task Force on Child Obesity, which is a group of 10 to 12 of us of very different backgrounds. We're chaired by Paul Lindley. And my kind of focus is obviously early years and catering. So we cover the catering with the Chef Academy now, so tick in the box for that. But the early years thing, as we know, is much more complicated. And of course, what we're trying to do is look at the kind of broader issues. But one of the interesting things about it is trying to find a route to getting other people's opinions. And when we started first, I was a bit innocent and naive, and I thought we'd just rock and roll, and it would just kick off, and we'd just have meetings, and that would be the end of it, and then we could just go off and talk to all these people. But in fact, the process has been quite complex, because I think the workings of large organisations like the GLA are not as, you know, easy as me rocking and rolling in LEYF and just getting on with it. And I did ask at the beginning for people's commentary and input, and I'm still really interested in that. I just haven't had a forum to be able to use it just yet, but I understand that our plan, which we've worked on behind the scenes, will be operational from September. And so from September we will actually have a plan that means that there will be more public, and then we'll be able to run with other conversations. So I'd love to have much more around the early years conversation brought into that. And that's a child obesity strategy that does encompass physical development and behavior change, and, you know, the whole thing, they call it the obesogenic kind of environment. So that kind of the journey from leaving your home, going to school or going to nursery or going anywhere, and all the sort of chicken shops and all the takeaways. And there's a complete correlation between people will eat more of those if they're on their way than if they're not available. And then the, you know, all the soft stuff around the edge, like we're very keen at LEYF on gardening and growing our own vegetables and getting the children in touch with that. In fact, we wrote a book about it. I have a very obsessive gardening daughter who's big into permaculture, and she was very keen. And right now we're also developing that broader across the organization through the lens of sustainability. All these things matter. And I think it's sometimes people think that, you know, it's just a eating too much issue, obesity, but it's actually much more complex. And then if you take a step away from it, there's kind of legislation around sugar, and there's marketing, and then there's, you know, the mayor is trying to do stuff around banning certain adverts. You know, all of those kind of things all kind of complicate the whole environment of food and how it's responded to. And then I think in terms of the question asked earlier, and then it's completely wrapped up in poverty. And, you know, you make mention of a policy that actually has the unintended or maybe intended consequence of excluding the very children who need the input by the way the policy is designed. So I think we, you know, those of you who are really keen on nutrition and food and the state of our food for our children, we have to have a bigger voice, and we have to have an articulation of our concerns about this. Not least because if you're to follow the logic, the NHS will just simply, you know, implode. I mean, now there's a real correlation between obesity and cancer. That we all know about diabetes, and then in there's a huge connection with asthma in small children around obesity as well, which people don't always think about. And then that's before you think about the sort of mental well-being issues, and you know how that impacts on people. I mean, if you were to think about how many people associate their well-being with food and their emotional well-being with food, are not, you know, so how many people have been taken to its extreme, you know, anorexia and bulimia, but actually there's something fundamentally challenged in their relationship with food. So it's a huge kind of set of different challenges that are all woven into a simple concept when they talk about obesity. So that's just one word, that's just huge set of issues. And I think we have a responsibility, because we work with small children, and somebody has to advocate for them, and we have to do it, you know, and so we have to do it together, and we have to do it in Ireland, and we have to do it in the UK, and we have to do it across the world, really, because they're all our children. So I can't see any more questions coming in, so you've obviously all left or gone to sleep, and are gone for your lunch even, which probably is a good idea. I do hope you have a happy and healthy lunch. And I have got a blog on this, and we will upload this webinar for you to have access to. And let's see this as the start of a big and strong conversation, and do feel free to contact me or to connect in any which way that you want. And I hope you have a lovely, lovely day, and I'll speak to you soon.